Brussels, speaking after the NATO emergency summit, saying that the U.S. has pledged $1 billion more in humanitarian aid, military aid for Ukraine. Also continuing, he said it's flowing in as we speak, he said moments ago there. He said more sanctions, and we learned about this in the last 24 hours against Russian oligarchs, members of parliament, against defense companies in Russia supplying the Russian military. He said NATO has never been this united before. He said Putin is actually getting the opposite of what he intended. You heard the president there asked about President Xi in China. He talked about his conversation with him almost a week ago now, that hour-long conversation, saying he did not threaten President Xi, but did warn him of the consequences, pointing out to President Xi the American companies, the companies of the West that have pulled out of Russia after this barbaric activity. Barbaric was the word President Biden used there moments ago. I want to bring in Terry Moran, standing by live in Brussels. And Terry, you have been there these last 24 hours and witnessed a meeting of these united NATO allies under just remarkable circumstances. The sober tone hanging over the entire meeting, very evident.
Absolutely, David. This is a new NATO, it feels like, a new Europe, a tougher tone, not just sober, but one that is almost grim in its determination to change NATO, to have it be not just defensive, but ready to confront and back down Russia led by Vladimir Putin. You heard it in the leader's words. The president of Estonia, in some ways, summing it up, saying a threat to Ukraine is a threat to all of the security of Europe. And also in their actions, Germany has doubled its defense budget in recent weeks. That is a historic shift for a country that had emphasized other aspects of its politics, of its international politics, and now they are really ramping up their military. There's no question that Europe has been changed by this, and once again a sense divided, that it will be divided between those Western, more liberal democracies and Russia and the autocratic countries that ally with it.
Terry, you and I were watching a very interesting question from our own chief White House correspondent, Cecilia Vega, who pressed President Biden on whether or not very early on the president saying the U.S. would not get involved militarily, that we would not want this to lead to a World War III with Russia. The president responding to Cecilia on that question. She also pressed on the threats of chemical weapons here. President Biden saying the potential is there that Russia would take that next step. What would the reaction be? So let's bring in Cecilia, who was in that room with the president just moments ago. First, Cecilia, on this notion of very early on saying the U.S. military would not get involved directly, the president was firm on this.
He said no and no, David, just one word answer to that, very clear. And look, this is something that the White House and the president, criticism that the White House and the president have been facing back home in Washington, particularly from Republicans, many of them who have said, why are you essentially putting your playbook out there, letting Vladimir Putin potentially take that, run with it, and look at the consequences that we are seeing here in Ukraine. But also, you're hearing that from other world leaders at some point, some saying, why is this the smartest strategy to have ruled this out so early on? But look, this is something that the president is not backing down from. You heard him tell me outright, he does not want World War III. He has made it very clear American troops are not going to cross into Ukraine at all in this conflict, and he is standing by that.
And Cecilia, on this notion of chemical weapons, we heard the president, even before he left Washington to head to the summit, he said the threat from Putin is very real when it comes to chemical weapons. He wouldn't discuss the intelligence, if there is actual intelligence that has led him to make this point so publicly. But Cecilia, you pressed him on what that response would be.
And this is a really big deal, David, because he is saying that there will be a response in kind if Putin decides to use chemical weapons in Ukraine. Now, the difference here is he is not spelling out what that response would be, and neither are other NATO allies. But, David, I also push the president. He is headed to Poland, where you are, to see likely some of these refugees, so many of those millions who have crossed into Poland. And I asked, will talking to them and hearing these stories personally change the way that you are responding to this conflict, not getting directly involved? And he didn't think it would. He says he's been to many, many war zones. He already knows what this emotional toll is. He is watching, like the rest of us, deeply concerned, but that's not going to move him into getting directly involved in this conflict.
Cecilia Vega, our thanks to you. And as you mentioned, the president comes here to Poland next, where he will see firsthand the refugee crisis unfolding. UNICEF out with new numbers today. More than 4 million children displaced in Ukraine. That's more than half of the children inside that country. More than 10 million have been displaced both inside Ukraine and outside Ukraine when it comes to Ukrainians as a whole. And that emergency widening by the day. We are on the Ukraine border, and let's go right into Lviv, Ukraine. James Longman standing by live. And James, a number of new developments today. Not only in the last 24 hours did we learn that Ukrainian forces have been able to push back Russian forces on the outer eastern suburbs of Kyiv, but there are conflicting reports about the status of Mariupol. So again, this is a conflict that obviously is still going. It is a grinding war, and today we mark the 1 month mark.
Yeah, that's right, David. 1 month of war, and I don't think anyone thought that we would be here now, not least Vladimir Putin, who, remember, I think most of us thought he wanted to take Kyiv, the capital, in just a few days, and yet here we are. Ukrainian forces are doing an extraordinary job, pushing Russian forces back some 34 miles to the east of Kyiv. Their invasion has stalled for all intents and purposes. In other parts of the country as well, we saw an extraordinary attack today on a ship, a Russian ship, in the port of Berdansk, destroyed by the Ukrainians. They say that they were bringing in more munitions, more weapons to continue their siege on Mariupol. You mentioned there, that is a city which has undergone a siege since almost the beginning of this war. 100,000 or so people still stuck there. And yes, tonight we are hearing conflicting reports about whether or not Russia has managed to take control of that city. But the big question is, what does control of a city, or indeed this country, really look like? What does a win for either side really look like? And the Ukrainians tonight will be watching President Biden and his contemporaries talking about ways in which to help their country perhaps not win, but to sustain this fight. We heard President Biden talking about not for this month, not just for the next month, but for the long term. They can take anything for another month, he said. So the Ukrainians want to know that they're going to get help for a long, long time. David?
James, you bring up a really important point. What does a win look like after the world has witnessed already such devastation in so many of the cities of Ukraine? Mariupol is just one example where nearly every building, every apartment building simply destroyed inside that city, and of course with so many lives already lost in Ukraine. Before we go here, we did want to check in with Martha Raddatz, who's also live here in Poland. She was on the Belarus border for these NATO exercises, getting exclusive access to NATO forces working together, among them U.S. troops. Martha, first of all, what did you witness? And you heard President Biden saying moments ago that NATO has never been more united than in this moment, which he said is exactly what Putin did not want here.
And that is exactly what we felt, David. This seems so much more than an exercise, not just a drill. As the Polish commander told us, this is a show of force. We were about 10 miles from Belarus. They kept looking over the horizon there and talking about Belarus, but mostly they were talking about Ukraine. The American battle group commander told us he just feels absolutely different about this exercise. And when he thinks about Ukraine, he said it's a gut punch. He said, I'll just leave it at that. But another said it's difficult to watch and not be able to do anything about it. We're direct action people. And that's what the Americans were saying there. But it was a very, very serious atmosphere there, and the threat very real. They talked about the threat of chemical weapons. The Polish commander in particular said if they come into Poland, or if they used chemical weapons, and we've heard none of those reports that they might do that, but it was certainly on his mind. He said, look, we have protective gear. It's the civilians I worry about, David.
Martha Raddatz getting just extraordinary access late today to the joint NATO exercises right there on the Poland-Belarus border. As you heard Martha say there, she talked with American soldiers what this means to be part of this NATO, not only the exercises, but this united front, the sober tone of this emergency summit, and as Terry Moran mentioned, a much tougher tone than what we've heard from NATO in recent years. And as President Biden said on the world stage today, NATO never more united than in this moment. Our coverage of the war in Ukraine will continue, of course, on ABC News Live, abcnews.com, and I'll be back with the entire team, including Martha's exclusive report coming up on World News Tonight. I'm David Muir, right here on the Ukraine-Poland border. I'll see you later today. Good day.
This has been a special report from ABC News. Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.